yes, it is true that the capitalist system is breaking down due to the incentives built into it and a failure to properly regulate nearly any level of it whatsoever, and to allow companies to get too big, wield too much power, and not be able to do anything about it at this point, and lacking both the political will or appetite to do so from anyone who holds any position of supposed power. But all that might be true. Have you considered upgrading to Capitalism Plus? So, in one of my videos last month, I went off a little bit on a few things and kind of threatened to talk about some of the larger aspects of how so much of what's going on is falling apart, and by design. Like, the short version is we're paying for more, we're getting less, and yet also a lot of these companies technically are still profitable, yet somehow also are. So I've got a lot to go over. I'm not going to say that this is going to be necessarily a magnum opus on capitalism, but I'm going to touch on a fair few things while trying to focus primarily on the ideas of goods and services being worse and costing more. And yes, there is a term that is a fairly recently coined one for this that I will bring up. I'm not going to say it early in the video, though, because YouTube gets weird about cursing early on, and there is a swear built into the phrase, but we'll get there. In any case, I don't know how long I'm going to go on, but we got a lot to talk about. As I said, the general notion of we're paying more and getting less has been on a lot of people's minds. I think one of the easiest ways to kind of quantify that, because like it's happening almost across the board, but one of the easiest ways to quantify that is what's going on with streaming right now. Multiple streaming services are not only just canceling shows, they are purging them from their system. They're no longer available to stream, and they are also at the same time jacking up their prices. Now, Max, I think it was still HBO Max at the time. Now it's just Max. I don't know at what point. I've lost track of the timeline. It's all a mess. It's been broken the whole time, so it doesn't really matter at what point it happened, whether it lined up with the renaming or not. But with Max, that was kind of kicked everything off, where they purged shows like Infinity Train and did not release the Batgirl movie and got rid of a whole bunch of stuff on the platform and then proceeded to jack up the price. Even before they jacked up the price, the question was being asked, so we're paying the same amount of money for literally less stuff? There's less stuff here now, and you're charging us the same. And then they upped the price. And of course, most of the other streamers have since followed suit. Disney's another one that has done a fair bit of that, purging shows from, in some cases, only a few months after they've been put up, and now also upping their pricing. You've had Netflix that has cracked down on password sharing, has introduced these other tiers, and is also looking into upping its price if they haven't done it already. Again, I'm losing track of all these things. So it's all costing more. A lot of it literally has less stuff. So this whole thing, which has the recently coined term of enshittification, because it was an okay thing, and it's been deliberately made worse. The thing is, most of the time this happens, it's not an accident. Well, actually, technically, it's never an accident, in that this is a choice being made by the corporations and the people who run them. Now, in some cases, it may not have been a choice that they had set out to make, but in other cases, it's been built in and it's been their intention from the start of business. In some cases, it came about more or less organically, or even in a couple of instances, possibly even accidentally, insofar as they kind of stumbled into it and then started doing it on purpose. I'll kind of go over all this, but before we get into this, by and large, this term, which was initially coined by Cory Doctorow, has largely been used to describe digital goods, streaming services, video games, things with subscription fees, those kinds of things. That's the main thing it's kind of been used, or at least that was what it initially was used to describe. You're paying a subscription for a thing, and then it gets overhauled, and it's worse, and they're charging you the same. Oh no, wait, now they're charging you more. What the actual hell? Let's first recognize that this is a natural sort of, I want to say evolution. I'm going to go with mutation. This is a natural occurring mutation and extrapolation out from something that has been around basically since after the Industrial Revolution. Planned obsolescence. Now, I could do an entire lengthy video just explaining planned obsolescence and going over specific instances of it. Rather than doing that, if you want a full breakdown, I will direct you to that video made by Some More News. But here's the quick breakdown. Planned obsolescence basically is the embodiment of the phrase, they don't make them like they used to. You've heard that, right? Well, it's true. They don't make them like they used to. Deliberately. By choice. Because the way things used to be pre-industrial revolution, let's say you were a woodworker in a village. You made a chair, and you made a real good chair, and not only would it survive the life of the person who bought it, they could probably keep it in their house, and then their children would have it, maybe even their grandchildren. And that's fine, because your needs aren't that great. There's enough people in the village. You make a chair, you make a table, you'll be fine. So the old idea of making things to last, because that's why they come to you to get you to make a chair, as opposed to the other guy in town who can make a chair, but it's going to break in 10 years. No, you get the good thing, the thing that'll last. Well, that doesn't really work once you start to scale things up past the needs of one individual craftsperson. Once you start scaling up to industrial levels, and once you make transportation in such a way that you can now move your product out to vastly more people, initially, you're going to be raking it in. You're going to sell them this thing, sell all it to all the people in this town. You're now a chair magnate. All these people in town get a chair that lasts a lifetime. Then the state, then the country, then everyone in the world gets a chair that lasts a lifetime. And then what do? Nobody has to replace the chair. It doesn't break. So you'll have this growth as you spread out to everyone you can sell it to. And like realistically, you can't sell it to everyone on the planet, but you hit the addressable market. And at a certain point, your growth slows because there aren't that many people left who haven't bought it. And the people who've already bought it, they don't need a new one. Once you scale up industry to be able to hit that big an addressable market, this is a problem. Now, there's a couple of ways to address it. One is to basically make different products as well, but that's just kind of kick the can down the road. You did chairs, now you do tables, now you do dining room sets, now you do beds. Okay, but you're still going to hit the same problem eventually. So, what do we do about this? Well, in more recent times, you add a lot of digital bells and whistles, but at a more basic level, and this goes back, as I say, decades and decades, you don't make it to last as long. You don't want it to last forever. You want it to break. You want it to need to be replaced, because that way you don't sell it to somebody once. You sell it over and over again as they need to replace the old one. This is something that we can actually track through a single corporate mascot. You ever hear of the Maytag Man? The Maytag Man was a campaign for Maytag, which made various electronic utilities, washers, dryers, later on expanding into dishwashers, microwaves, refrigerators, etc. And the Maytag Man, the whole pitch with that ad campaign, when it started back in the 60s, was the Maytag Man's the loneliest guy in town because almost nobody ever calls him.
It's not often that anybody needs us Maytag repairmen. That's why we're the loneliest guys in town.
Maytags are so well built, they don't even need to be serviced, hardly at all. Poor guy.
There is one difference between Newton and Maytag. Newton needs me.
Now, interestingly, last decade, they brought back the Maytag Man. Also revamped him. So now it was like kind of a funny, cute visual thing where like he was embodying the utility or the appliance. It was kind of cute, but you'll notice they're not doing the same thing anymore. because the products aren't made to last anymore. And they know that. So they brought back the character from the nostalgia, but they had to do a completely different thing with him because these things aren't made like that anymore. It's arguable how much they were actually made in the vein of what they claimed they were, but they can't even claim that now and they know it. I remember when I was younger, you'd go to a place like Sears and you'd see stuff with stickers on it that would say lifetime guarantee. You don't see that anymore. If you're lucky, you'll see something with a 10-year guarantee, more likely a 5. They don't even bother trying to pretend that it'll last longer than that. And that's not even getting into the issue that a lot of these lifetime guarantees are warranties that have a lot of loopholes in them. So it was still perfectly capable of breaking down just in a way that they weren't going to be willing to replace because they worded it in legalese. But even setting that aside, good luck finding anything with a lifetime guarantee anymore. So that was planned obsolescence. And that mentality leads very naturally into enshittification. So let's talk a bit more about that. As I said, the streaming services are a really good example. But pretty much anything that starts out as, honestly, this is just amazing, but there's either going to be something going on behind the scenes or they're going to have to implement something later that's going to make it all go to hell. Here's a fun fact about a lot of you either don't know or have forgotten. When Hulu, the streaming service that Disney just fully bought out 100%, corporate consolidation, it's a nightmare. But Hulu, when it first launched, it was free.
Hulu beams TV directly to your portable computing devices, giving you more of the cerebral gelatinizing shows you want anytime, anywhere, for free.
That was the pitch. It didn't stay free. And they were never, ever going to keep it free. But it launched as free.
We built Hulu to pump thousands of hours of free TV right into the one screen you drag around everywhere.
Because that is how they hooked people in. They got people invested in the product. And then they started offering Hulu Plus.
And our latest silver bullet, Hulu Plus. Full seasons and full series runs of your favorite shows in your new favorite place, everywhere.
Oh yeah, we still got free Hulu. But here's this thing with extra stuff. And then you keep expanding. Get as many people who are on the free version to start paying for it, and then you just start jacking up the price. That was always the plan. It had to be. The initial business model of it's free was unsustainable. Actually, this is part of what got me on this in the first place. Streaming models are unsustainable for the most part as is. The only one that has been posting any profit at all is Netflix, and even they aren't in the clear because they have billions of dollars in debt, but they are technically year over year making profit, at least currently. But part of this whole thing and part of what lights the fire under it is it's not enough to be profitable, you have to be growing. But I will come back to that. Stick a pin in it, we'll come back to it. You know what's a good industry to look at as sort of an embodiment of this? Video games. Again, I have the benefit of age. When I was a kid, video games did actually still cost $60 brand new for the most part. And it was a complete experience. Whether it was a good experience or bad experience, depending on the game you got, but it was a complete experience. Whatever the game could do, it was all there on the cartridge. Yeah, that's how old I am. NES and SNES, baby! Cartridges all the way. But it was either there on the cartridge or it wasn't. When you bought it, you got it. Whatever was there was yours. So let's take a look at a specific series. Let's take a look at, I don't know, Mortal Kombat. So Mortal Kombat starts out, and back in the 16-bit days, you would have fun stuff like unlockable characters, alternate costumes that were just already on the cartridge. Maybe you had to unlock them through gameplay or with a code, but they were all there. You had all of it when you bought it. Flash forward a few years, and suddenly we get DLC and microtransactions. Then later on down the line, what if we didn't sell complete alternate costumes? What if we sold cosmetics? What if we sold a ton of variants of, I don't know, just a vest, just a belt, just the boots? And all of that was available for sale as individual pieces. Yeah, put them in a loot box, sure, but like we sell it. We sell it in pieces. This stuff used to just be included. It was just part of the product. Now, an example like Mortal Kombat is kind of what I mean when I say some aspects of enshittification are companies kind of stumbling ass backwards into it. And I think something like that is kind of the case. I think it started with when microtransactions first became a thing and horse armor was a joke. It was a meme. Everybody laughed at it. But as it became normalized, the idea of microtransactions, I think companies like NetherRealm, which makes the Mortal Kombat games, I think they probably looked at, well, do you think would they go for this? Let's try it. And I don't think, especially for a game series and a company that's been around since the early 90s, they didn't go in the 90s going, and in 30 years, we'll be selling them individual cosmetic pieces. So while some of the companies we're going to be talking about later, and some of the ones I've already mentioned, such as Hulu, were deliberately always intending to alter their structure and their pricing and what they offered, that wasn't the case with something like Mortal Kombat, but they still end up in the same end place. You're either paying more to get the same thing, or you're paying the same amount and getting less. Because I've picked on Mortal Kombat because it's an easy one to sort of gauge over time, but most video games at this point, if it is what is generally called AAA game, these are the big budget, fully rendered, fully 3D, realistic graphics kind of games by the major studios with names you recognize, Nintendo, Sony, Sega, EA, Activision, Blizzard, bleh, and et cetera, those sorts of folks. Pretty much all of those, at this point, the $60 price is a starter price. That's what you pay for the base game. But it will be missing tons of stuff that 30 years ago, if it existed for the game at all, would have just been included. And now it's not. Now, I'm sure there are some people out there, defenders of video games, who will make an argument like, well, no. They have to do all this because games are more expensive to make now. Back in the 8-bit and 16-bit era when you were playing, you frickin' fossil, you could make a game with a team of 3 people. Like these days, those AAA games you're bashing on, those take hundreds of people. They cost more to make, and they've had to find ways to make more money. That's true, but that brings us back to kind of a form of planned obsolescence. Did they have to be made bigger and better? They will claim, or at least the defenders of these practices will claim, that the audience and the players demanded better graphics, demanded more features, demanded more realism. Did they? Did they really? Or is that what you sold them to justify them buying a new installment in the game series? Because otherwise, maybe we'd still be happy playing Mortal Kombat 3 Ultimate from the mid-90s. But you don't want us to be happy with old things. You want us to shell out again. And if you're basically just selling us the same game again, and that is, I'm sorry, it is very much the case, especially in a fighting game genre, where the fundamentals have changed very little, certainly not nearly as much as some other genres have leapt forward over time. You want to keep selling us those on a regular basis? Well, you got to do something, because the core fundamentals are the same. This has actually been a problem with the video game industry in general. I'd say at its core of most video game design, in terms of what they're actually doing and the concepts, has stagnated pretty heavily, I'd say, from first half of PS3, Xbox 360 generation. I think that pretty much any idea that somebody wanted to do that like they're doing now could have been done then. It's just a matter of the technicals. Like now they do it at a bigger scale and it's prettier, but like the core concepts, they don't need to be flashier. They can work on something that is more frugal, but that would mean we don't have to buy a new system. That would mean we don't have to buy a new game. So that is sort of the difference with this version of machinification versus planned obsolescence. It's not that the old stuff is breaking, although video games are notorious for being really bad at archiving their old games and backwards compatibility. But even setting that aside, it's not that the old stuff's breaking. It's that they have to convince us that they've made something that we will want instead. But even that is better than some of the other stuff that happens. At the very least, while I and others might argue against how necessary the continually upgraded realistic graphics are, like how much fundamentally has the gameplay and core concepts and overall presentation, other than like the refinement of the realistic graphics, how much has changed from Mortal Kombat 9 to the recent release Mortal Kombat 1? Because that's not freaking confusing. How much has actually changed? Not a lot. And actually, I could probably go further back than that, but I'm going to go with that one because that's the one that I know was very much in the vein of what has just been locked in for what NetherRealm does now. What has changed? Really just the visuals. But they have to make the visuals better. Because how else are they going to convince us to keep buying it? Because they can't settle to just sell us a thing and then make a completely new thing. See, that's one of the ways in which things have shifted over time. You remember how I mentioned, like, okay, so you start by selling a chair. Well, then you make a new thing. You sell them a table, a bed, etc. You know what's easier than that, if you can do it? Sell them the same thing over and over again. Not because the old one broke, which was planned obsolescence, but because it's the same thing again, but now with X. Now with, in the case of video games, prettier graphics. In the case of a lot of cars, now with a touchscreen dashboard. My current car, I got in 2019. And I really resent the fact that it has a touchscreen dashboard. I've gotten used to it with time, but like if I had had the option from that dealership to get one that didn't have that console, I would have. I didn't want it. I didn't need it. But they were going to make me get it. Cars are another thing that are kind of notorious in this whole thing. Because 30 years ago, 40 years ago, with a little mechanic know-how and the right tools, you could maintain your car yourself. You can't now. A ton of it is computerized, electronics. You need to have a special diagnostic device that will hook up and talk to the proprietary software built into your car. It's actually a bit of a problem for a lot of local mechanics. If you're like me and you have a mechanic that you currently trust, you want to be able to go to them, they can help you with, the raw mechanics of it, the engine, swap out your air filters, change your oil, that kind of thing. But there's a whole swath of stuff that if it breaks down, they can't help because they can't even diagnose it. Because to get something that'll talk to huge parts of the car requires proprietary stuff that is only available for me to take it to the mechanic at the dealer. And I don't go to the mechanic at the dealer if I have any option whatsoever. You know why? Because every single time I've gone to the mechanic at a dealer, I have been told, well, we could address this, or I could direct you over to the guys over in the sales department over there, and they could look at trading this in and getting you a new one with a nice fresh loan. All of this, what I've talked about and so much more. It ultimately spawns from something that I mentioned and I said we come back to. It's not enough to be profitable. You have to be growing. In fact, for a while, you don't even have to be profitable. As I said, most of the streaming services aren't profitable. Now, in their cases, that's starting to catch up with them a lot faster than I think they expected, and they have divided the market up so much that not many of them are going to be able to make it. They're just going to become money sinks. But I also don't necessarily blame the various studios and IP holders for trying, because their old methods of making revenue off of things like TV and movies, they don't exist anymore. Thanks to things like streaming, initially just Netflix. But I understand why these other businesses wanted to get in on it, because what used to happen was, however you saw a movie, assuming you saw it by legal means, however you saw a movie, you went to the movie theater, they got a cut of the ticket. You rented it from a Blockbuster, they got a cut of that rental. You bought a physical copy, they got a part of that. You watched it on TV, they got a part of the ad revenue. However you consumed a movie, they got a piece of it. And they got a piece of it every time you took it in. Not every time you watch it if you like bought the thing. You buy it, they only get to sell it to you once. But you buy it, they make money off that. You rent it, they make money off that. You see it in the theater, they make money off that. And that's for every movie, every time. Instead, with Netflix or any of the other things, for about the cost of 1 or 2 movie tickets per month, you now have access to hundreds, thousands of movies and shows. But they've only made the 1-month subscription off you. Now, subscriptions can still be very insidious, especially when implemented into something that has no business being in a subscription service. To come back to vehicles real quick, BMW, subscription for heated seats. And I forget which car company it was, but one of them is going to have a subscription service to have the car actually perform at its best ability. So introducing a subscription to something like that, that's just insidious from the ground up. That's just forcing people to pay extra for something that they used to just have and deliberately removing something. You are taking it from them. They used to have it. It used to be standard. Now you have taken it away. So like subscriptions can be very insidious. But when it comes to something like a streaming platform, you get 1 month off of a month subscription, but they can watch so much stuff, and you don't make a per view money off that. You don't make money off it the way you do on movie tickets, the way you do on movie rentals, the way you do on movie purchases. You just don't. But the thing is, those old forms were either dying or just weren't as profitable as they used to be. Netflix was incredibly disruptive. And Netflix, being the one who got in there first, is about the only one that is in fact profitable. Again, asterisk, mountains of debt. Hey, just jumping in real quick from the editing phase, it looks like from an IndieWire article from earlier this year that Hulu is also profitable. Now, I don't have as much hard data on that one as I do on Netflix, but it would make sense since Hulu is the second oldest of these things and has had the most time to build up during a period where there was not nearly as much competition. So, yeah, that tracks. I get why they tried, because otherwise they were basically giving up the market completely to Netflix. And the ways they used to make money before, they were gone. But they launched instead into something unsustainable, and definitely unsustainable for as many of them as there are. And so now they're being made worse and charging us more. So they're going to break them. They're going to make them worse and have less and be more expensive so that they can claw the profit back. And they will justify that on the basis of, well, we used to make more money. Now, like, obviously these companies are making more money year over year, but it's through a combination of things. A lot of it's acquisitions and a lot of it is layoffs. But they have their accounting trickery to make it look like the company is bigger year over year. But in terms of like the actual income streams on something like entertainment, on something like movies, it's not what it was. And so what they'll do is they will say, well, we have to raise the price. We're not pulling in as much from these things as we used to, even though in some cases they are, at least with some of these things in the theaters. But to be fair, in a lot of cases, no, they're not. But you built something knowing that you were going to have to make it worse later. You hooked us in on something and then charged us more and made it worse. And you do this without ever touching the salaries of the people who make tens of millions of dollars per year at the top And instead you say, well, you're just going to have to pay more, I'm afraid. Why? Why? We didn't make bad business decisions. We haven't made predatory monetization models. You did that. We have to pay more for that? And as I said, they'll sort of frame it as well, it's what we have to do, except it isn't. Or it wouldn't be if they didn't have to grow as opposed to just make a profit. Because as I said, it is all about growth. Now, technically, if a business is just profitable, does that give returns to investors? Because this is all where it breaks down, ultimately. There are a ton of problems with capitalism, like a ton. But a lot of the worst aspects of it right now come down to the idea of investors and what is done to please investors. Now, investors could just be making dividends off a profitable business. But the thing is, that's not enough to satisfy the biggest and most aggressive investors anymore. Because you make more money off of growth than you do off of dividends if you are a stockholder, if you are an investor in a company. You make more money by them getting bigger year over year over year than you do from them just being profitable and maintaining. You make something from that, but it's not as much.
Corporations don't just want some of the money, they want all of the money.
And you make way more when something is growing bigger year over year over year. Now, the streaming services are weird because they are subdivisions of other companies for pretty much all of them, except like Netflix. With a lot of these companies, a lot of the tech companies, Twitter, Facebook, any number of them, they weren't profitable. Some of them still aren't, or they've only been profitable a couple of times. But they still pulled in heavy investment because they were growing. Were they making money? No, but they were growing their user base. And it was all about potential. How much bigger will they get? What more will they do? And so more money got poured in, more investment got put in. Stock price rises, even though it's not actually profitable. Because being profitable isn't the point of a business anymore. And I know some people are going to balk at that. Well, isn't the point of a corporation to make money? Yes, but that's not the same as the business model being profitable. Because a corporation makes money by people putting money into it. And investors putting money into it means it's making money. That does not mean that they have to be making profit in the standard sense of their revenue is higher than their expenses. That's all profit means. But profit isn't enough. And profit isn't what gets you the big bucks. What gets you the big bucks, what gets you launched and adopted quickly, is something that is deliberately unsustainable. It's Hulu being free. It's Twitter initially launching with no real advertisements, just like, hey, come here and do this microblogging thing. And they got investments because they knew if they could get enough people on it, then they could start having ads. Then they could start doing things that would push it. And then they could start selling your data. That's a whole other thing, an aspect of this, especially when we talk about the tech companies. All of this has gotten worse. And so many of these companies launch unprofitably. Now, like, launching unprofitably is standard. Generally, to launch any business, tech or anything else, you have to put a ton of money in at the start. You have to build whatever it is. Whether it's a restaurant to bring the building up to code and get your kitchen working and staff up, or whether it be a social media app where you have to build all the tech infrastructure and get it coded and make sure you have the bandwidth to run the dang thing. Whatever it is, startup costs are going to be high. So there will always be, for any business, a period where more money has been sunk into it than it's generating. But the way so much of it has been built now is they start out not only having lost more money than they could generate, but their initial pitch of the business isn't something that is going to eventually be profitable. Because the normal way, the way that it used to work, the way that used to be standard is, okay, so you have a model that you believe will become profitable eventually. So after 10 years, you'll have covered your initial startup costs and debt, and then it will be true profit as opposed to revenue where you just make more than you spent, but you're still in the hole because of the old stuff. Again, talking about Netflix, and yeah, they're profitable in terms that they have a positive revenue, but they have still mountains of debt. Yeah, that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. But it used to just be that, okay, I want to launch a business. Here's my business model. This is what I need to start it up. And I believe it will take me 10 years if I am successful in the way I intend to be. The revenue that I bring in versus the expenses will have balanced the initial cost, and then it's profit. True profit. Now it's throw the money in, build something that will never be profitable, but will bring in people. We'll get them on board. We'll get them committed. We'll get them invested with their time and their needs, if not their money, and then find ways to make money off them once you have them. And shittification is a result of companies and businesses and models approaching or hitting their ceiling. I've talked about this with Netflix specifically. A couple years ago, they started actually losing subscribers because eventually that product was going to hit a ceiling. As many people as were going to want to get it will have gotten it. And so now they have to jack up the price. Now they have to crack down on password sharing. Now they have to find a way to make more money off the customers they already have, because otherwise they can't grow. And if you can't grow, some investors will leave. Not all of them. Not all of them. Some will just stay and be happy with the dividends, but not all of them. They'll go, oh, you're not growing anymore. Oh, I'm going to pull out my money and put it into this thing that's growing. And that can, if it happens quickly enough, just become a death spiral. But this is why the only time that these companies are honest are usually on investor calls. You'll see them put out their puff pieces, their press releases saying this, that, oh, well, we need to do this, or, it's tough for us to do that. And then stuff will leak out from investor calls, and they're very upfront with the investors. They will sometimes cook their numbers in terms of promising to make more money next year than they did last year, when realistically they know that's not going to happen. And I know that for a fact because I used to work in sales, and I used to work in sales at a company that was profitable. But it had to grow. It had to grow every year. And every year I was expected as a salesperson for my forecast to be higher than it was the previous year, even if I could lay out mathematically why that is not going to happen. With the accounts I have, I cannot make a commitment to make you more money than I did this past year. And certainly not by as much as you're telling me that you want it to be. They would make me do it anyway. They would make me forecast anyway, and then hold me responsible for failing to hit the numbers that I told them I couldn't hit in the first place. But they forced on me because that's what they needed the numbers to be. They needed everybody in sales to have a forecast that was higher than the year before so that they could take that to, well, in the case of that company, people who were going to buy it. Because it wasn't a big enough company to have investors in the standard sense, but there was an investment group looking to buy it. And so they wanted to be able to show them, see, we made more money this year and this year and this year, and we're now projecting the end of this year coming, we're going to make even more. Even though a bunch of people in sales were telling them, no, I can't do that. They would just tell us, well, give us a projection for the number we want and then figure out how to do it. They would make us lie. That's what they do. They already know what number the investors want to hear. And unless things have broken down so badly that they can't even have the hope that maybe somehow they'll be able to pull this out of their ass, only then, and usually only after it's happened, only after it's taken a downturn that they probably didn't give the investors a heads up on because that would cause them to pull their money in advance, only after they have failed to meet these things. I say with investors is the only time they're honest. That wasn't really true, but it's the closest they come to honest. Because at least after something goes bad, they'll be honest about what happened. But of course, they were dishonest about their growth potential in the first place. And understand, I'm not trying to single out the company I used to work for as like, I'm blowing the whistle. Like, no, this is what they do. This is what they all do. projections have to be more than the year before. And then, since you've given those numbers, you've promised them to investors, it's now the job of everybody underneath the executive class to figure out how to make that happen. The numbers are locked in. You don't get to tell them, we think this is how much this project will make. They tell you, this is how much it has to make, and it can't cost more than this. Figure it out. And you have managers crunching workers into mandatory overtime and 100-hour work weeks, and you have people getting laid off just to cut the costs so that the expenses don't exceed what they were supposed to, so that the numbers balance the way that you already promised a bunch of investors that they're going to, even though you don't know how you're possibly going to do that. You say you know how, but you don't really. So you raise prices, you milk the customers, you screw over the workers, you do everything you can to hit the number you've already promised to your investors, because they are the only ones who matter. The consumer doesn't matter. The customer doesn't matter. The customer is a cow that you milk for as much as you can to please the investors. They are the only ones who matter in the current state of capitalism as it exists, at least when you get to a company of scale. Mom and pop stores, look, you're still working under the capitalist system, but admittedly, these are problems I'm talking about once you get to a certain scale. I mean, once you're at a scale where you have multiple investors and or stockholders, shareholders, etc., yeah, this is what happens. Once it scales up, once it gets industrial, once it gets big enough to pull these kinds of investors, this is just what happens. You can't grow every year, but you have to promise you're going to. And so you have to find some way to do that. And if you can't sell them a new product, find a way to make them buy the old one again. Promise that it has new features. Ensure that the old one breaks. Start making them pay extra for stuff that you used to just build in. All these things have to be done in order to maintain the illusion of continued growth year over year. Continued growth is also part of the reason, by the way, why a lot of these acquisitions happen. Disney bought Marvel because Marvel had growth potential. Disney bought Lucasfilm because Lucasfilm had growth potential. The Star Wars property in particular was basically just being used for video games, books, comics, which there's money in that, but that's not the big money. The big money's in the movies. So they bought it knowing that they could grow it bigger by making more movies. They bought Marvel because they saw what Marvel was doing and going, if we own that, then all of their growth becomes our growth. That's why these acquisitions happen. Because at a certain point, these companies, be it their main core business or their various subsidiaries, eventually they either hit a ceiling or the inherent unprofitability of the model catches up with them because maybe it was never going to work, and they can't keep growing. So you fake growth by buying a company that does still have growth potential and growing that and pretending your entire thing is getting bigger, because now suddenly Marvel's growth is on Disney's ledgers. And yeah, there you have to have a certain amount of transparency. Again, not with the public necessarily, but you have to have a certain amount of transparency in terms of which divisions of the company are and aren't profitable. But as I said, profitability isn't enough. Other than COVID having happened, which was a big hit. But like, the theme parks have always been profitable, but they haven't been growing. Not that much. But Marvel could grow. They could have, their Disney output, their Pixar output, the theme parks. That can be the base level. We're already profitable at this, but we're not growing. But then we grab Marvel. We grab Lucasfilm. Now these can grow. I'm not singling out Disney because it's the worst offender. I mean, it might be. I don't know. I don't feel like ranking these things. I'm singling out because it's one that's really easy to illustrate what I'm talking about. When you can't just make a new product that people want and sell it, You do whatever you can to pump the numbers. You acquire companies, you lay off your workforce, you charge more for a product, you spend less to make it. You get people to pay either continuously or repeatedly for something they used to pay for only once. You take something, you make it worse, you charge more. Because you can't just get enough people to buy it to keep growing. You got to squeeze the ones who are already there. So you, again, to come back to the streaming services where we started, you strip out content. That's stuff you now don't have to pay residuals on, don't have to pay the storage space to host the media, and you charge more. You've saved money, and you're pulling in more. And you do it by screwing over the people that supposedly are meant to matter. Customer's always right? Nah.
Customer's always an asshole.
At least that's how they view us. Is there a solution? At this point, I don't know. Like, regulation, I don't know if that will fix what's already happened. Because the purpose of regulation of industries like this, of antitrust regulation and all these sorts of things, the intent of that was to stop the current situation from happening. But the situation has already happened. And I don't know if regulation can roll us back to an earlier point. And I don't know how far back you'd have to roll to have it not still be a nightmare. Like 50 years probably, but even then we're still stuck in the same system with the same incentives and the same ability to be broken in the exact same ways it already has been. The enshittification of our apps, websites, entertainment, etc., is just an embodiment of late-stage capitalism. It is an encapsulation of what's wrong with the whole damn system. And I didn't necessarily come into this intending to do a direct and pointed indictment of capitalism as a whole, but never forget that capitalism is exploitative by nature. The only way a business can be profitable is if they pay the people who make it less than they will sell it for. So the value that labor brings to create the product will always be underpaid, or the customer will always be overcharged. One of those two things has to be the case. Because if you paid people what their labor was worth, then you would just break even. Because their labor creates the product and gave it value. You now have to sell it for more than you paid them. So if we take that price that you sold it at as what the thing is worth, you've paid them less than the value of their labor, because that's the only way you can make a profit. Or you jack up the price beyond what is reasonable, beyond what you should be charging, and you screw over the customer. Or, increasingly, you do both. You underpay your workers, you overcharge your customers. But while it has gotten worse, that core nugget of exploitation is built into the system. It is the nature of capitalism. It requires that workers be paid less than the value their labor brings. That is literally the nature of the system. It is exploitative by nature. The degree of that exploitation has exploded in the last 40 years. But it's always been there. It's an exploitative system by design. Yay! Did I just depress the heck out of all of you? I'm sorry. Kind of had to get all this stuff off my chest. Clearly, given how long I've just gone off. But, yeah, enough people said that they wanted to hear me go off about it that I was like, okay, I guess I'm dumping everything into this. Again, I didn't necessarily mean to, but welcome to my brain. These connections exist in my head. It's really hard for me to talk about just the one thing without pulling in, and this illustrates that, and this is because of that, and here's this thing I know. I try and restrain my brain a little bit more most times. I just kind of let it do its thing this time. So, welcome to a slightly less filtered version of my head. And thank you for watching. If you are this far in, my goodness, bless you. But whatever your thoughts are on any of this, including if you disagree with me, which, like, you're entitled to do. I obviously have a very strong belief in my convictions and my point of view, but, like, if you can do it without calling me vicious names or being transphobic at me for no reason, given that I didn't bring up trans issues, if you can offer criticism or critique for what I've said without doing those things, I'm open to that. But whatever your thoughts might be, drop them down in the comments and let's talk about it. Patreon is how I am able to continue to exist in the capitalist hellscape in which we are all trapped. Any amount is of great assistance. It is why I'm able to actually talk about things like this, because goodness knows what the YouTube algorithm is going to do to this. I have no clue. It likes me when I talk about stuff that can be classified as drama, which I don't like talking about, but it plays well. This probably won't, but regardless, Patreon is what ensures that I'm able to keep coming back and keep talking to you folks about this geekiness, fun stuff sometimes even, whatever it might be. But if you can't help me out that way, that's okay. There's links to other stuff I do down in the description. The like, share, subscribe, those help. Don't worry too much about it, though. What I really want you to remember is, though we may all be trapped in this system, that doesn't change the fact that you are beautiful, you are valid, and you are loved. You are the council, and I am just running the meetings. And until next time, this council is adjourned. Time for me to thank my highest supporting patrons: Robin Moore, Zubin Lutfula, Goddess Elida, Oliver B., Tarak, The Thing That Goes Doink in the Anime, Ruth, Goes with the Gazarian, Solitary Pictures, Ulrich Bogdan, Geek Filter, Melinda Walters, Toku BL Hubian, Jen, Auntie Kate 808, Becky Sparks, Renabi Likes the Poodle, Robin Powell, T Love, Tracy Scrappet, Angry Casperl, Dave Hall, Quite Bearish, Rosalind Bennett, Pao Barabajagal, I'm sorry for whatever butchery I did to that, and Mira G. I know I've kind of done like funky stuff saying them the last few times. I had this whole idea where I was gonna like sing them to the tune of Carol of the Bells, but then I realized it's gonna like clash with my outro music, and I didn't really want to rework that or just cut the outro music out altogether. That felt weird, so I just didn't do a thing this time. But now I've told you that I didn't do a thing, so I've made a thing about there being no thing. Okay. Thanks for sticking around. Bye.